Denise Howell here. Coming up on This Week in Law, can books survive the era of Google and the iPad? Can readers survive the era of Verner via Autodesk? And why are there strippers on that cop car? Education blogger Chris Dawson, literary agent Ashley Grayson, and internet lawyer extraordinaire Evan Brown join me to sort out all this and more right here on TWiL.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell, episode 79. You had me at Teddy Bear Vampire.
This Week in Law is brought to you by Squarespace.com, the fast and easy way to publish a high-quality website or blog. For a free trial and 10% off your new account for life, go to squarespace.com/TWiL.
Hi, I'm Denise Howell, and you've tuned in for This Week in Law. We're going to have a very bookish show this week, and I'm really excited about because there's so much going on in the world of publishing and electronic publishing and copyright law and licensing that relates to all this, that I wanted to try and bundle it all up and have a coherent, if we can, discussion about it all. So to assist with that, I've got some great panelists joining us today. On the show with us today are Chris Dawson, ZDNet's education blogger. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful to have you. Also joining us to provide a bit of inside information from the world of writing and publishing is Ashley Grayson, literary agent from the Grayson Agency. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, nice to be here.
Great to have you. And of course, our wonderful constant or semi-constant Evan Brown from Hinshaw and Culbertson and InternetCases.com in Chicago, Illinois. Hi, Evan.
How's it going? I try to be as constant as I can. So, we'll try my best. That's for sure. Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Well, that goes with our literary theme, right? The constant gardener, perhaps. The constant lawyer. Yes. Evan Brown. Yes. So I'd love to jump right into some of the really fascinating stuff that's been going on. And one of the things is something we talked about on the show last week, and that's this Verner versus Autodesk case that came out of the Ninth Circuit and had us all scratching our heads and wondering about the future of not just things like software. That case found that if licenses that are associated with software are sufficiently restrictive, that you actually can be barred from reselling software in many circumstances. And a lot of people started thinking about the ramifications of that on the literary and publishing worlds. So I want to talk about aftermarkets for books. And I want to talk about whether we're moving into an era where books can have only one owner. We're so used to being able to read a book and pass it along and resell it and do all sorts of things with this physical property that we've purchased. And now that we're going to a world where things are so much more digital and electronic in the publishing arenas, I'm wondering if that's going to go away. And Chris, you've had a series of posts on your education blog at ZDNet that thought about these issues in the context of academia and textbooks. You want to bring us up to speed there on what you've been thinking about while your son's been prepping to go into fall term this year?
Yeah, so there's two angles to this. My primary area of interest was K-12 to start with, and we all know the textbooks that kids carry around with them and that get shared from class to class. So that when so many school administrators talk about, hey, we should get Kindles, or hey, we should use ebooks, there's no good mechanism for letting a kid use that for one semester and then begin using it, pass it to another kid for another semester. There's just no licensing that deals with that. So that's one aspect of it. The second piece, of course, then is in college. So my oldest son is off to college for his first year there, and here we are paying exorbitant sums for books, some of which are available electronically, and some of which are available for rental, and some of which are available for rental electronically. There's a lot of different paradigms, and it really depends on what your college bookstore is willing to do, and it depends on what your various publishers might be willing to do or able to do, and what partnerships exist. So this runs the gamut. I've been talking to a number of colleges, a number of schools, and a number of school bookstores, and found there's not a really consistent approach, unfortunately, which makes it a little bit hard for students to know where to look. So what does that all mean? What that means is that we're in our infancy. There's a lot of electronic content which is becoming available. Students, I think, are finding that they can get pretty cheaply an electronic form of a textbook, maybe not the cool interactive stuff we've been hoping for years, but at least a pretty PDF that lives on their computer. And they can do that pretty cheaply and have it generally for a semester before some sort of DRM restriction kicks in, and then they no longer have access. So where does that leave in terms of an aftermarket? Well, the used book aftermarket is going away because you can't really resell or return your rented DRM'd PDF. Does that kick us off?
Yeah, I think it does. What about the aftermarket in physical books? I realize that's something that's going the way of the dinosaur as we move into the era of electronic publishing. But for the time being, we still do have physical books out there. Are they still relevant in colleges these days?
Absolutely. The lines still exist at the college bookstores, and the kids are still grabbing their stacks of books and hopefully getting them used because they're half the price. We're certainly seeing a lot of textbook rentals, though. So now you kind of take out that middleman where someone has to buy that new book to begin with, and then it gets returned, and now you're buying a used book. Now you just rent the used book. Occasionally you end up renting a new book, but it's still roughly the cost of the used book. So I think that rentals as well, in terms of a physical textbook, are circumventing or taking away that traditional, you go and you buy the book and you resell at the end of the semester. Really, you're now just returning rented books. The used textbooks, they're still there. There's still stacks of them, but I think that is going, like you said, with the way of the dinosaurs. There's Chegg now, and there's a number of eFollett has rentals. Barnes & Noble has rentals. A lot of companies are simply just cutting out that buy, return, and just doing rentals to begin with.
Yeah, I wish we'd had that in law school. That would have been a nice feature.
Yeah. It is saving a lot of money. I mean, the money savings are extraordinary, but it's still, this is 2010. And I think that so many students are walking into this completely connected and expecting something different. In high school, we all know the teachers roll out the books and you mark the condition in the books at the beginning of the class and you give them back to the teacher at the end. This is a whole different ballgame, and yet it's the same ballgame. And I think it's a little tough for really connected kids to swallow when they walk into a bookstore and they still have to carry this big stack of books, and then they go access rich content otherwise that's completely unrelated to the work they're doing in school. That doesn't sit well with folks.
Well, you had sort of a prescription in your textbook racket post on end running the physical book scenario altogether. What did you suggest people do, and do you think it's really realistic?
I think it's getting there. After that, a little bit of background. So what I suggested was that people simply start looking. Do whatever they can to avoid their college bookstore. And obviously the college bookstore trade groups didn't like that suggestion. But what I suggested people do is they use the internet, they use Google, they use whatever, and they go out and they find their books elsewhere, whether they're electronic books direct from the publisher, whether they're rented books from Chegg or from other sources, they're used books on Amazon. If they can avoid their college bookstore, chances are they're going to save some cash. The other thing that I suggested is there may actually be a new market here. And I've had a few people email me saying, hey, I'd like to be part of that market, but why not pay those college bookstore employees, instead of paying them to go get your big stacks of books for you, why not pay them to comb the internet and find the best prices for you? Find the best sources of ebooks. Find used books that are sitting in some distributor hooked up with Amazon out in Oklahoma for $5 instead of $100. I was able to save probably about 50% of the cost of what my kid would have paid at his college bookstore if I'd, actually bought everything for him at the college bookstore. So a little looking actually can go a long ways in terms of saving money. Again, the college bookstore folks think that you should go and get the guaranteed absolute right edition. But how many professors tell their students, don't go to a bookstore, go to Amazon, go somewhere else? A lot of them, actually. It's in syllabi. And so I suggested that the internet is really the best place to get a start as opposed to your college bookstore.
Is this leading to chaos as we have, various different print and electronic editions of reference books that people are trying to refer to and have a conversation about in the educational arena, and they can't pinpoint, the exact location of the passage they're talking about because their version is different than somebody else's version? Does that matter? Will that all shake out?
It does matter, and I will say I've got to throw one bone to the college bookstore people. They said, well, how can you be guaranteed if you're buying something from some vendor via eBay or Amazon, how can you guarantee you get exactly the edition that your professor has prescribed? And you can't. So my kid has a third edition as opposed to a fourth edition of an art history book. He hates the art history class anyway, so that's okay. But it is an issue in terms of common reference points. If you look at a Kindle, for example, which is somewhat irrelevant in this market, but Kindles refer to locations as opposed to page numbers because they don't matter anymore. If you're looking at a web page, that it's hard to reference an actual page number. So unless everybody has the ebook and can reference an actual location, then you're right. It does cause problems in a classroom. If you're talking about content, though, and it's a reference, which is what it should be. I mean, you shouldn't be, okay, let's drone on with death by PowerPoint here, and we're referencing chapter 2 of your art history book. It should instead be a conversation about the topics that are covered in a reference. And your book should be references. If you just needed the books, then why pay tens of thousands of dollars to go to college?
Yeah, exactly. Hey, we've got a great question from our IRC here that I'll toss out to Evan first and then to you, Chris. The concept is that you would lend a Kindle loaded with purchased books by college or K through 12 libraries. So I guess you would, I don't know how the lending versus the purchase would fall out in this scenario, but the Jim S. in IRC wants to know, does this fall under the same for sale rights that allow lending of physical media? And when does a contract or EULA trump any rights you might normally have? And do educational institutions have the same rights as individual consumers? What do you think, Evan?
Well, there are several different things wound up into that series of questions. And so rather than just trying to answer each question individually, I think it's going to do us some good to at least talk about some of the issues that arise there. Clearly loading it onto a Kindle and distributing that physical thing is going to be a different sort of analysis than if you were actually just trying to give an electronic copy of the software to someone, like transmitting it to load onto their own device, because then because it's on a physical medium like that, it would appear, so long as it is properly licensed to be installed onto that Kindle in the first instance, it would appear that any transfer or conveyance or lending or whatever would be protected under the first sale doctrine. Now, certainly, we've got new things to think about if there are truly wrinkles in the first sale doctrine and its applicability after the Verner case, because we would have to look at the original arrangement under which the work was licensed to the party loading it onto the Kindle, and if there are certain restrictions there that may something that would actually restrict this sort of thing that we're talking about here of handing the Kindle out to the students, then there is a greater risk that would be an infringement. No doubt it's an innovative way of looking at things. And with that said, I forget what the other portions of the questions were, but that's an interesting notion, and it wouldn't surprise me to see some thinking along those lines and some action, on the part of schools doing this.
Yeah, I think you covered it. The rest of the question related to, when you could have a license that would trump your ordinary first sale rights.
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, that's the whole confusion of the Verner case, or the uncertainty that's introduced to the equation. And one thing, kind of just following up on something Chris said, and this is perhaps a bit futuristic-y in talking about some of these things and thinking of where things will be even after ebooks become kind of commonplace. You were talking about the importance of the web and electronic resources, and you were kind of framing it, Chris, in the notion of students coming to the college these days being so well connected and clearly all digital natives. The people starting college now. I'm wondering if the whole notion of the book, whether it be a physical book or an ebook, sometime at some point in the future will become an antiquated notion when we characterize information out there as objects on the web or whatever incarnation the web will have. If you think of everything as having a URI out there, every bit or every object of content out there, are we going to get to a state of affairs where the whole notion of information encapsulated into one kind of unit, aka a book, is going to seem out of date, out of sorts, completely not in line with the way that people consume information? Is there any merit in thinking of reality along those lines, do you think?
Sort of like record albums, right?
Yes.
100%. You're entirely correct, and I think kids already do think that the idea of a textbook is a complete anachronism. They access information randomly, and they access information in whatever order it needs to be accessed. If you ask them a question, they're going to start looking for information. And why would you start flipping through a table of contents when you can just search? And why would you be confined then to a PDF or something where you maybe need to now link out from inside a PDF to now look at another resource? Those resources are readily available. Google has done wonderful things for students. They've done terrible things, but they've done wonderful things too in terms of simply being able to access information as needed when you need it. So Wolfram Alpha has actually just it is very infancy, but they've just released some technology that allows them in real time to populate information that exists in electronic resources. So we have Pearson, we have some other publishers who are getting on board with this and are saying, look, we should be providing information resources, we should be providing references, and they should have real-time information in them. So Wolfram Alpha now becomes a driving force behind that, kind of exists on the back end. This is a much different way of thinking than we have an e-book. They're information resources, and they're collected around a common topic, and the idea of a book, it's got to go. I mean, we're probably 5 years away, the educated guess, but it's going.
Yeah. This is Ashley Grayson. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we sure can. And I just had a question for you, Ashley, unless you want to interject a comment at this point on what you've been listening to.
Actually, I haven't been listening to a single thing because as soon as the program started, my connection was dropped by Skype, and I've never heard anything except the last 2 minutes. But I do think, based on what I just heard, that we are way off the topic of what relates to the real nature of the book and the mess that the publishing industry is in at the moment. All of this talk about information is fine, and legal people can't necessarily get too deep into the ignorable trivia of bits of information in databases. The history of the temperature on the top of the Sears Tower over the last 20 years is great information to have in a database, and maybe the people who measured it and put the data in there have some interest in it. But the real thing that characterizes books, whether they're the Manual of Surgery or whether they're the latest best-selling novel, is that books have authors. And authors need to earn money from having created the analysis, if it's nonfiction, the inspiration, if it's not based on facts at all, or the story, if it's fiction. And what we're seeing with the ebooks is that regardless of what happens to the presentation of textbooks, which are in their own mess, the assault on author incomes in the publishing industry is reached phenomenal proportions.
Well, let's get to that, Ashley. I wanted to mention and thank Charlie Pettit for putting me together with you and suggesting that you come on our show. Charlie got mentioned on TWiL a couple of episodes ago by Jerry Purnell, and he's an old friend from the blogosphere and a very smart lawyer around authorly issues. And so I'd love to share with you a question that he sent me that he thought you would love to field. And we were talking about this question of the aftermarket for books and whether you'll be able to resell them or give them away the way we're used to doing when everything is digital and licensed, or even when they're not digital. I think that Charlie's envisioning that someone might slap a license on the front of a hard copy book. Anyway, what he wrote in and wanted me to ask you was what all this means for the future contract negotiations between authors and publishers. Since the 76 Copyright Act arguably made all such transactions that were not work for hire mere licenses, and this new case, Verner, seems to reinforce the right and ability of the rights holder to unilaterally declare something a license and not a sale. What does this mean? What's going to happen now, Ashley?
Well, that's a really good issue to put on the table because...
Oh, before you answer, though, let me jump in for 1 second. Chris, are you typing?
I am. Oh, sorry. I'll
Yes, when you type, we can hear. Thanks.
Sorry. Thanks.
Go ahead, Ashley.
Publishers have a business model in their own minds, which is completely at variance with the copyright law and the functional needs of the marketplace. Publishers believe that they can cherry pick the best works by the best authors and agree to accept 90% of that creator's income forever for the act of simply becoming their publisher. Now, when books were printed on dead trees and sold through a complex network of bookstores, booksellers, and all that, publishers earned most of that money by keeping track of the physical books. But in reality, publishers always think of the book as being an object and the content of it being incidental. Charles Scribner, back in the 20s, when asked by an author, why do I only get 25% royalty for writing the book and Scribner's and Sons get 75%? And Mr. Scribner said, because we actually make the books, you authors only put the words on the pages. And that's really the model that publishers use. They want to deny the authors intellectual property rights at every level. They're delighted to put the author's name on the cover because that helps them sell books. But they treat everything as a sale, and it really is a license. And the joy to me of ebooks, and I love ebooks, and I love all the ebook readers and so on, is because it re-empowers for the first time the author that readers are buying something the author wrote. And they're not buying the hardcover. They're not buying the trade paperback or the mass market edition. They buy those as a way to get to the content. But it's really the content that counts. And ebooks are going to once again free content creators to actually earn a decent living out of their works.
And is that because we just don't need publishers anymore? That self-publishing is actually coming into its own? It's not going to be something that's just marginalized and doesn't find a market?
Well, self-publishing is kind of a dirty annoyance because it allows anybody who thinks they have an idea to get their crazy idea and their jumble of words in front of people. But in reality, it's a good long-term solution for many, many people. Publishers' business model is basically, we will loan the author's future earnings, or a portion of them, as an advance, and in return, we take control of between 85 and 96% of all of the income created by the exploitation of that work in some readable form. And at the best, you get a 15% royalty on the hardcover, and at worst, you get a 4 to 6% royalty on the mass market paperback. And when those were the only ways to reach readers, and the practicality of the distribution system was such that the publisher did a lot of real work and took a lot of risk and moved a lot of paper pulp around in order to make those sales, that was quite reasonable. But I think we're going to see paper books disappear in the next 5 years, other than as a nice artifact. Mm-hmm. I mean, fine leather wallets have not gone out of commerce just because you can do everything you want to with a single credit card these days. But there's no longer any need to print 10,000 hardcovers and distribute them randomly around the country in the hope that someone will walk into a bookstore looking for a book and buy it. And what we see in book retailing is that book retailers have, for the past 5 or 6 years, lost all interest in selling books. Just a couple of days ago was an announcement that Borders Group was going to add the Build-A-Bear, Make-Your-Own Teddy Bear franchise into their bookstores, and would then be selling yoga clothes as part of their initiative, shifting the bookstore from being a place that sells books to a retailer that discounts books as a way to get people into the store to sell them other goods and services. So the whole royalty structure of author earning money by the sale of their books is in danger of falling off the cliff, because as books only get sold at discount, because booksellers don't want to sell them at full price because they don't want to worry about the content, they just want units to move like bananas at 19 cents a pound. This has got to change. It's not a sustainable model.
What do you think, Chris? How are authors disintermediating their conventional business distribution channels these days?
Well, a good example is me. So I'm writing a book right now. It doesn't need to have a monster distribution. It's something of a niche, and I can find plenty of ways to distribute it. I'm using Fast Pencil, and they provide lots of great tools, and off I go. I think over on the IRC channel, there's a lot of people talking about credibility, though. And particularly in the case of educational texts, obviously, you want to ensure that students are getting authentic and real and reasonable, credible works. So I think we've seen some great moves forward in terms of open source texts. People, and just as the open source community in terms of software, it has a lot of folks contributing to a solution. The same goes for open source texts, and the solutions that are good and the texts that are quite reasonable will bubble to the top, and the ones that aren't will drift off to the side. And so again, publishers become less important. I think somebody noted that on the IRC that publishers buy credibility, even for unknown authors. Now the community can provide that credibility. Crowdsourcing can provide that credibility, and someone's own credentials as they're producing electronic content. Then that provides some credibility. So all that means that the publishers have a role, but that role is certainly diminishing when we have movements in open source and in self-publication that are easy and really, really valuable.
I like the way you're talking about that, and I don't disagree in terms of kind of crowdsourcing the credibility, for lack of a better term. Kind of refer to this by shorthand. But I'm wondering if there's some danger in doing that way. That we, when we have this disintermediation, when the role of the publisher as vetter is taken out, and we're left to the more of a survival of the fittest when it comes to quality of ideas and the way that they're presented, so that the good content rises to the top and the bad stuff is put to the side. Is there a danger of the harm occasioned by the collateral damage? Or I guess I'm being a little bit redundant there, but is there some unreasonable collateral damage that can happen in this process of bad information or not well presented information being pushed off to the side? And I'm thinking, principally in terms of people relying on bad information, making policy or even just personal decisions based on stuff that's not good. Is it possible to understate that risk? If it is a risk.
I think you need to be very careful to not reinterject the confusion between information, which can either be accurate or relevant or from a trusted source or not, with created content and analysis, whether it's in an essay or whatever, that is produced by an author who creates a work.
Well, how else do we get the information other than through the form in which it's given to us, we as members of the consumer's market?
Well, you mentioned the question about the place of publishers as vetters. That is certainly true. And remember that the publisher's business model is to cherry pick not the best works available for publication, but the works that they know how to sell. And I have been told, as an agent who talks to publishers every day, repeatedly over time, that when I say, this is a great book, it's going to have a great audience, I know they're out there, it will speak to a lot of people, and publishers are saying, we do not speak to readers. Publishers' business is providing content, a product that fits under the shelf labels on traditional bookstores. So, for example, if you were to write a book, and I actually saw one of these the other day, a very nice, warm, thoughtful book of taking your children to parks and major events in different cities. And the mother who wrote the book thought it would be a great idea. Well, this turns out to be an unsaleable book because it cannot be stocked in a single location at a bookstore. Is it stocked under parenting, under travel, under children's activities? And therefore, a bookstore will never order the book because a book can only be in one place. Whereas an ebook, for example, can be in 100 places at once, and there's no extra cost for that. But publishers have stepped away from being the vetters of quality for quite some time. I mean, they're still not going to publish the terrible things that we see self-published by authors who get no editing and haven't a clue what they're doing. But publishers acquire books in genres, in formats, because right now, at least, the big market is for multi-title bind-ups in trade paperback to sell to young adults, for example. So any number of titles that can be grouped in 2 or 3 or 4 books in a volume can potentially find its way to the shelf. But a single book that didn't fit into that category might have trouble getting back into print, because the publisher is focused on the physical property, not solely on the content. And publishers, if you pay attention to the business model of publishing, publishers take control of, let's say, 85% of the cash flow generated by an author's work, And then they give half of that away, slightly more than half. They give 50% discount to booksellers because publishers do not want to talk to readers. They want to only deal with booksellers that they can sell to and leave the bookseller with the problem of presenting the book to the public. This works fine until you start having major collapses in publishing, like the collapse of Anderson News a couple of years ago, where the distributor isn't making enough money because the retailers are selling all their books at 40% discount, because retailers only know discounting now as a way to get sales to happen. And they're draining all the money out of the business. The only place to come back and get it is to somehow take it out of the author's 15 or 10%. So there's a great war going on that's not acknowledged by many publishers, that much of what they do today is in fact beyond their control or fruitless.
So, Ashley, I'm a budding new author. I've never published before. This is hypothetical. I'm not actually. But I come to you as my potential agent, and I give you my opus, and you read it and you think it's great. What do you advise me at this point? You know, do you advise me to go through the traditional channels and try and get a traditional publisher who's going to basically screw me in our publishing deal and discount my works? Or do you tell me something else? And if so, what do you tell me?
Well, let's defuse the word publisher's going to screw you first, because publishing is really not, in its best operations, crooked. It's more like casino gambling. The odds are so focused on the publisher's long-term profitability that they're not going to take any risks. So they can treat you completely honestly and completely fairly and account accurately, and still you won't necessarily be getting as good a return on the investment that you put into creating that book as you might otherwise get. Now, one of the things that makes this problem solvable for most literary agents, including me in the past, is that all publishers operate pretty much the same. So as literary agents, when we take your great debut book out, we can show it to one of the great publishers, you know, Penguin or Random House or Macmillan or whatever, and say, isn't this a great book? And they'll say, yes, sir, 3 bags full, it is a great book. And publisher number one will say, but we have another book that involves a vampire teddy bear, and we can't take a second one this season. Meanwhile, the other publisher will say, oh, I know publisher number one, and their book of the vampire teddy bear is doing really great. I wish I had one of those too. So I'll offer you a $50,000 advance and an 8% royalty, and, you know, all the details of what agents deal with. And publisher number three will say, well, we're thinking of getting into teddy bear vampires in a really, really big way. So we'll offer you $65,000 and a flat 10% royalty, and we want to take this book off the table, and this offer is good for another 6 hours. So then as agents, we get on the phone with you and say, well, we can get more money for you in the next 6 months from publisher number three, but publisher number two has a more focused vision of what they might do with you, and they want to do a 2-book deal, and then it becomes, you know, a very complicated thing. One of the things that makes agents very valuable is that every deal and every opportunity for every author and every book has to be looked at as an individual item. And the difficulty with publishers is that they have contracts and basic deal formats that are one-size-fits-all. And a lot of the legal language that we're seeing in contracts is completely one-size-fits-all. And, for example, the warranty clauses in contracts are now extremely bizarre because publishers insist on the same language in a celebrity biography that they insist on having in a children's fantasy novel. And if you have a children's fantasy novel like Narnia, chances are big lions who are leaders of revolutionary groups are not going to want to sue you for maligning their movement. But if you did a biography of the latest politician who's in trouble, chances of getting a lot of legal crap is, quite high. So what might be appropriate for both the author and the publisher together in one book ends up in the language of a contract for another book. And this is what we sort out.
Okay, so suppose, yes, that answers my question. But suppose I agree with Virgil in our IRC here that the odds are always going to be in favor of the publisher no matter how good a deal I get from one over another. The whole publishing model is still not the best opportunity for me as a new upcoming author, that I would be out in the cold using that model. Chris, do you think that I could get the same kind of traction just looking to internet resources to distribute my work and get it out there, something like Lulu or other types of self-publishing?
Not yet, no. And I think for the long term, if you're looking at general interest authors, there's going to need to be something else behind you besides, the fast pencil direct publish to Kindle. That being said, for people looking at texts or reference materials or niche markets, for example, then I think, yes, you can absolutely hit your audience through some non-traditional channels. And folks on IRC mentioned ck12.org, started by a bunch of Silicon Valley parents who didn't like the content their kids were using, and the Dead Tree books their kids were using in school. And really now there's some outstanding open source books that the state of California is beginning to adopt. Again, in its infancy, but there's compelling content being created that's being picked up by mainstream institutions. So it depends on the market, depends on the audience. I think we're a ways away from, the future John Grishams of the world getting to become John Grisham by publishing an ebook.
Okay, so we still need publishers, but I'm hearing from both of you in different ways that we don't need bookstores. Is that right? What do you think, Chris?
Absolutely.
I mean, physical brick and mortar bookstores.
As much as I love going to Borders or Barnes & Noble, I go there for a cup of coffee and I get a Danish and I hook up to the free Wi-Fi and I don't buy books. I take my wife there because she hates ebooks and she hates all things electronic, and she's the world's biggest Luddite. So she comes with me and she buys books. That she sticks on a shelf because we have 5 kids and she has no time to read them. So, really, bookstores are dead. That's why I got them at Amazon.
Right, exactly. And I guess Ashley, maybe the Borders is trying to do Build-A-Bear so that they could have some sort of vampire teddy bear tie-in with something on the shelf.
One that collects your personal information, right?
Yes, exactly.
Is that your history with Build-A-Bear?
Yes. I walked into Build-A-Bear and was stunned by what their computers wanted me and my son to put in order to get our little certificate that our bear had been born. But that's beside the point. Ashley, so our bookstores, are they just going to turn into department stores? What do you gather from these couple of links that you sent us about Pilates equipment and teddy bears?
Well, I was in one of the big chains. I go into all the big chains several times a month just to check on things. And around Valentine's Day, all of the clutter of products near the cash register, the stuff that is moved up to be an inspirational purchase, or were chocolate bars tied to Twilight. So we had Edward's Ultra Dark and Bella's Nutty Bar. that were actually selling pretty well. I didn't buy them because I didn't like the chocolate manufacturer underneath, but using books to sell other merchandise is a new thing. And with this movement of retailers, see, book retailers are currently run and have been for the past couple of decades, run by people from the grocery business. And the people who really love bookstores, who operate bookstores, were all put out of business by Crown Books, whose slogan was, if you paid full price for a book, you didn't buy it at Crown. If you look at the Borders.com or Amazon or any of the bookstores, whether they have physical stores or not, the message is discount, discount, discount. And so the entire retailing establishment has driven the public awareness to the fact that list prices for books should never be paid. No one has, in the recent past, said, this book is so great, it's a steal at $25 a copy or whatever it is. You are going to be so proud of yourself that you bought this book for this price. Whereas in reality, many books are that valuable. And retailers and publishers should be broadcasting the message, our books are important. They inspire you to new ideas. They entertain you much more intensely than even DVDs of your favorite reruns of TV shows. So books should have some value. Authors should participate in that value, but retailers don't want to have to explain to people why they want to buy a book. They feel it's beyond them because they fired everybody who ever worked at a bookstore who knew what books were. Mm-hmm. So retailers, I think, will gradually get out of the book business just because 40 new titles from one publisher alone is more than they can even get up on the shelves. And we've seen that even reputable publishers of the highest order of recognition for quality and judgment have published books on which they got a pickup from Borders and the Barnes & Noble Group of fewer than 1,000 copies nationwide for first-line hardcover books within an identifiable genre like mystery, romance, science fiction, or whatever. And if the retailers aren't going to put the books on display because they don't want that money encumbered, and the publishers can't make any money, everybody loses. The answer to this, in a certain sense, is the ebook, because the ebook can be presented everywhere all at once at virtually no cost. So the Kindle is doing pretty well. One problem we have with the Kindle is that although the product itself is getting better and better every time, and I'll probably buy the new $150 model. I don't have one at the moment. But in our little agency, we do have 3 iPads and 6 iPhones. So we can read ebooks on the Apple devices just as easily as anywhere, and Kindle thoughtfully provides a Kindle reader on all the Apple iOS devices as well. There's 120 million Apple devices out there that can buy ebooks. So when I look at someone like you, say, coming to our agency with your hot new debut book, if we can get a good deal from a publisher, we will want to sell it to them because you'll want to be published by Knopf or Macmillan or for our Strauss and Giroux or, whoever is appropriate for whatever kind of book you've written. But if it doesn't fall into that category, or if all these big guys say, well, I think we're past the vampire teddy bear market window, then in the future, there is no reason why authors and agents together can't publish directly at the Apple iBookstore or with Kindle. And in those deals, we don't get 75% of the net amount received, which is what publishers offer for ebooks. We get 70% of the price paid by the consumer, and we get to set the price. So for certain
that's
books,
got to be wildly appealing.
For certain books, where the content will sell itself or the history of the author will sell itself, getting 75% of the price we set is a lot better deal than 25% of the net the publisher gets, because in this world, the publisher's not performing any task that earns them that 75% share, because all they do is provide a file to the distributor, retailer, whatever you want to call it, the Apple iBookstore or Amazon, and that file gets made visible to everyone. And it's certainly worth something. But it's not worth 75% of the gross. And the other thing we have to remember is that we've only talked about the fact that publishers pay a fraction of the income that comes to them, to the authors. Publishers also hold on to the cash flow that they receive for anywhere from 6 months to 24 months before they trickle it out to the author. And by that time, they have made many authors unable to earn a living by writing their books. And we've done some computations that say for a new author with a debut book that might sell 3,500 copies if it was well published by a good publisher and they got $1 a copy, if they sell 2,000 copies over an electronic bookstore with a file that's properly managed for them by a partner who doesn't take 75%, they can make 3 times what they could ever get in total earnings of the book and not lose money in this accounting vacuum. I don't know if anybody's followed the Dorchester situation, but here we have a publisher that was a very able, although stingy, but functional traditional publisher who has now reached the point of approaching a feared bankruptcy. And they had a creditors meeting recently. And one of the things that came out of all of the discussion was that the creditors of the publisher, and this would be true of any publisher, but this particular company has a difficulty. The creditors who provide transportation services, printing, shipping, binding, and paper all know how much the company owes them. And so they can value their bill, as it were. With authors, the authors have no awareness of how much they are owed, and the publisher has not produced any trackable royalty statements in 2 years. So being a publisher can be good. You get everybody's money. You get to hold on it as long as you like. You get to come up with a million reasons for not paying the author. And at the end of the day, if you declare bankruptcy, the author's works are the assets of the company, and they don't even get them back. So there's a lot of reason for the industry to rethink the role of publishers today.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, I had a couple of thoughts while you were talking. One observation and one follow-up question for you, Ashley. The observation is, I hear what you're saying about what both of you, Chris, too, are saying about the antiquated nature of bookstores and the fact that they're becoming unnecessary. And hey, you know, I think I started buying books at Amazon about day 3 that they opened for business. And, you know, people are constantly kicking aside the boxes on my front doorstep that are mostly filled with paper, you know, hardbound books from Amazon. So I'm still buying those things, even though I do have the Kindle and the iPad. But recently I had an experience of going to Borders with my son and seeing firsthand what you're talking about. The fact that the store has minimal employees to consult with if you have a question or need a recommendation. They've just got people at the cash registers, right? But what they do have is this environment where it is really nice to walk around and touch the books. And of course, they try and pull you in. They had a whole, not just Build-A-Bear and Pilates equipment, but at this particular Borders, they had a whole toy section. 3 shelves full of Legos and, sort of educational-oriented toys that parents would be happy with their kids playing with as opposed to parked in front of the television. But, so that was a huge draw for my son to be in there. And of course, they do a really nice children's section where he just wants to sit and read the books. And for him, he's growing up in the world of electronic media all around him, especially in my household. But, the hard copy books, he's just as comfortable with. I don't think he wants to say goodbye to them and only read things on the iPad. We have the 70th anniversary edition of The Hobbit that we just finished, which is so much nicer to read in the hardbound form. I then proceeded to download, the rest of the Lord of the Rings to the iPad because that's nice to be able to carry around in a very portable format. But what you miss that we got with The Hobbit in its hardbound form is all those nice drawings and illustrations and maps and stuff. They just don't come through as well in digital format. You're constantly having to flip to the back, and that's not easy in the iPad world. So I guess the question then is, if we're going to go to digital distribution, are we going to lose that really nice experience of books that have a visual element to them, or are the devices just going to evolve and fix that for us? What do you think, Ashley?
My personal belief is that technology fixes everything. So I would be surprised if there is not a child-proof iPad made from, Krell metal with a bulletproof glass screen that can be chewed on sometime in the next couple of years. The flaw of the children's section in a large chain bookstore is what goes on behind the scenes. Any given day, you can find a lot of stuff. If you actually look at the material that's there, especially around the holiday season, most of it is crapware that is tied to television and movie license franchises. So if you have a cool, spooky story for Halloween, the chances of getting it anywhere on a table where a kid might see it next to the Star Wars Halloween Spectacular or any other franchise that can spin this off, the more difficult. The other problem is that the publisher paid through the nose to get those books put out on the tables for the kids. The retailers, like grocery stores, charge approximately $25,000 a month for displaying books on holiday tables or on end caps. And if you're selling the latest Nora Roberts blockbuster, this is just a small marketing expense for the publisher. But if you're an honest, hardworking publisher who's got a great children's book, maybe 1 or 2 titles in a series, the first thing you have to do is you have to cough up $25,000 to bribe the retailer to display the books. Then they only promise 65 to 75% in-store compliance with any program. So you may, in fact, not get those books seen. And in the case of one of our clients' books, they were on the table, but they were on the bottom shelf, spine out on the back side of the table. So there was absolutely no benefit in the publisher doing, the good, honest work they tried to do. Part of this, and I asked them, well, why don't you demand performance? And basically the answer is, they're trapped in the system. Everybody pretends to do the job, and that's all they can do because there are so few booksellers left. They can't make demands anymore. They can only comply. And when there's no mechanism for tracking compliance or getting feedback on the cost of marketing promotions, publishers in the last few years, not being stupid, of course, they're very smart people, they don't want to throw money around. Not that they ever threw it around a lot. So it's going to become more and more difficult. I suspect there may be a resurgence in small privately owned children's bookstores where that kind of fun environment for the kids can be found.
Right, because if you can get kids in that environment, you're going to sell books. I mean, parents are thrilled to be able to get their kids reading, and then I thought even the educational toys that were there were brilliant. You know, you're making the parents feel good about this purchase, and I spent some serious money that day at Barnes & Noble, and I haven't been inside a brick-and-mortar bookstore in a long time. So, you know, I think they've got something compelling going on there, at least on the children's front. And then they've got these membership programs, right, where you sign. It's sort of the Amazon Prime model, where you sign up and you. Holy Toledo, am I still there? My screen just completely went out.
Yeah, you're still there.
Okay, good. No, I don't know what just happened. I think I thought I had everything turned off as far as power saving and screensavers, but apparently not. You guys just kind of freaked me out there for a second. Okay. So the point that I was trying to make is that I think that there's still something there, you know, to market the physical book, and that they're at least trying to be creative with these. You know, like I said, the Amazon Prime type, you sign up for a one-time fee, you wind up getting a deep discount for the rest of your purchases that year. And I don't know. I mean, at least they're trying to be creative, but maybe it's only the big guys that are left. Chris, what do you think about all this?
Well,
Whoops, it looks like I think we lost him right there.
All right, now we're just, our technology is rearing up against us here in many forms. So, Evan, you've got kids. Do you think that maybe the fact that kids still read real books are the salvation of the bookstore, or is that just a stopgap thing? And by the time our kids have kids, everything will be digital.
As for me and, you know, the books that we buy in our family, I mean, we rely on the Borders, which is, you know, within walking distance of our home. If you go into our boys' rooms, you know, they are 4 and 2. So they've got, you know, they're getting quite a nice little book collection. It's, you know, there are lots of books in there that most of them we have just, you know, gotten, you know, at the neighborhood bookstore. You know, I mean, it should be no secret that I am very enthusiastic and optimistic about the way technology will progress. But for me, I have not seen anything on which to base the conclusion that there will be a digital solution that replaces an experience that is at its essence analog. And for that reason, you know, I just revert to the baseline of saying that books will always be around. I think it's safe to say that they'll play a critical role in our lives, especially growing up, you know, with children, you know, for as long as, I don't want to be over dramatic about this, but I think they'll always be there because of that inherent, irreplaceable analog experience. Unless we can get to the point where, you know, we've manipulated the brain circuitry in such a way to make us think we're having an analog experience, even though it's digitally originated. I don't see a replacement, and especially for kids because of their dexterity and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things you have to keep in mind is that something like 2/3 of Americans live more than 40 miles from the nearest bookstore. So your experience doesn't really count. And the books that are available are probably at the Walmart, where they only have about 10 slots for children's books to feature them. So in order for a publisher and an author to get their book displayed at Kmart or Walmart or whatever, they have to displace Twilight or the 39 Clues, which are already selling in the hundreds of millions of copies. And no retailer is going to allocate space to a new book, a new idea, a fresh thing, if they have to take out something that sells 30 copies a week. And that's just getting worse, because during the 1980s and 90s, there were on average 2 bookstores, a B. Dalton and a Walden Books, for example, at the opposite ends of every major mall development in America. Those stores were all forced out by the mall landlords in the 90s because they wanted higher-priced retailers in there than bookstores, and the bookstores tended to attract a crowd of mall-wandering, mall-rat teenagers, and they hung around and kept the older, richer folks from being able to get to the Banana Republic and the even higher-end stores. So today, most book retailers are the large superstores, which are a destination, and it's great that it's a destination for you that's nearby, and for many people it is, but those superstores can no longer support their real estate on the margins that they have declared for themselves by selling all their stock at 30% off, and specials and bestsellers at 40% off. So I love booksellers. I would love to be able to help every major chain and every private bookstore sell more books, but they won't cooperate. The largest bookstore in eastern Los Angeles will not speak to agents and authors for arranging signings. They will only talk to publishers, publicity people. And part of that is just arrogance, and part of it is the practicality that, author book signings, for example, don't sell books, which is another marketing pain that self-published authors really need to learn.
Okay. That's a tragedy, and I wish that that weren't the case, but we appreciate your insight on that, Ashley. I want to talk, since we've pretty much settled that at least part of the future is ebooks, I want to talk about the future of ebooks in a moment. But first, I'd like to thank our sponsor for this show. TWiL episode 79 is brought to you by Squarespace.com. And talking about publishing and good ways of publishing, Squarespace is an excellent way to publish a high-quality website or blog. You know that you can get 10% off the lifetime of your Squarespace account if you go to squarespace.com/TWiL and use TWiL, TWiL, as your offer code. And when you do that, what you'll wind up getting is a very easy to use UI for creating and managing a website or blog. I use it for my personal blog, bagandbaggage.com, which is sort of my home and identity on the web. And it gives me all kinds of options and flexibility to put exactly what I want there in the way that I want it. I'm not much of an expert on those fronts, and I'm able to use it just fine. But if you are a CSS expert, it's wonderful for you. You can get all your style sheets up there just the way that you like. There are hundreds of design templates to choose from, and you can customize any of the designs to fit your needs. The all-inclusive service includes several modules to build your website, a blog module that can let you import and export from all kinds of other platforms such as WordPress and Blogger and Movable Type and TypePad. There's a way to build a forum. There's a form builder if you want to have people give you information that way. There's a Flickr photo display. There's a Twitter widget. There's Google Maps and more. It's got great social networking integration. The tracking information that you get, the stats, are wonderfully visually presented and very informative. The cloud architecture that keeps your site up and running fast and reliably is wonderful. I've never had a moment of downtime or trouble with the site at all. There's a great iPhone app that you can, post from there on the go. And it really meets all of your website needs. You can build your site, host it, and update it anytime, either from your computer or your iPhone, as I said. So go ahead and give it a try. Sign up for a free account. You don't need a credit card. Just try it out and see what you think. And then if you decide to purchase, don't forget to get 10% off the lifetime of your account by going to squarespace.com/TWiL and using TWiL as your offer code. So guys, let's talk about ebooks and the future of them. There's a great video that the design gurus at IDEO put out, and I'm hoping you guys got the chance to take a look. I'm not going to play it on the show because it's pretty long. It's in the show notes. Actually, it's got a short URL over at Vimeo. I'll just say it for you, vimeo.com/151-42335. And it's a fascinating look. It's a very sort of tablet-oriented touch interface vision of some concept products that IDEO has put out there called Nelson, Coupland, and Alice. And they are reading and aggregation tools. And I'm just wondering, Chris, did you take a look? Do you think that this has a good educational application?
We just lost him again, literally.
Oh, that's too bad. How about Ashley? Do you think that this solves the issues of books that we'd rather right now look at visually, that have lots of visual components?
I'm not familiar with that particular product, but one of the great opportunities in the ebook space is for better ebook formats for illustrated or interactive ebooks, and we don't have one of those right now. The EPUB format, which is used by the Apple devices and the Sony readers, and I believe the Kobo reader, is best for simple text. Amazon has a proprietary locked-down variant, which is comparable and not that much harder to use to format ebooks, but nobody has the equivalent of an Adobe InDesign or Dreamweaver kind of approach to making ebooks. I think pretty soon in the next year we'll see HTML5 based ebooks, and then virtually anything becomes possible.
What do you think of this, Evan? Did you check it out?
I just watched a little bit of the first part of it. Unfortunately, Vimeo's blocked here on my restrictive work network. But I like what Ashley is saying about the need for some kind of real innovation here, and I think that goes to what you were saying, Denise, about actually making these things easier to use, being able to flip back and forth to things. So there promises to be so much innovation with new devices coming out on the market and new customer demands. It's going to be exciting to see what's coming around.
Well, let's bring this back into the legal context. When everything is digital, as we're talking about books moving toward here, there's much more and much better piracy. You can make perfect copies of the thing and schlep them around the web quite easily. So the war escalates between the rights holders and the folks who want better, easier, reduced cost or free access to copyrighted works. And we've seen some examples of that war playing out this week. We had the dedicated denial of service attacks by various protesters against the MPAA and RIAA sites. And then we had this new piece of legislation that was proposed in the Senate by Patrick Leahy and Orrin Hatch called COICA that basically provides an internet kill switch for any site that has a .com, .net, or .org domain, since all of those registries, domain registries, are headquartered in the U.S., the way this legislation would work is you would file a complaint with the Department of Justice about, whatever site, say piratebay.com. And if they agreed that that site was dedicated to copyright infringement, they would just go to the registry and serve an injunction that says, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be able to allow people to access piratebay.com anymore, anywhere. Evan, what do you think about these developments, and how do you think that they play out once we start talking about more and more digital publishing alternatives?
Naturally, with more digital publishing alternatives, that means more content, more opportunities for piracy. So it's no surprise that there are these efforts, both on both sides of the equation, with the 4chan kind of people doing the DDoS attack, and also with our friends up on Capitol Hill in the Senate introducing bills like this. It's not easy to overstate the danger in this bill that's introduced, which you wrote about so well earlier in the week, or I guess maybe last weekend, earlier in the week. I guess the thing I like about the bill is just fun saying it, COICA. The combating online infringement. So just try to say that as often as possible. But a couple of things that are really troubling about this, and in the end, I hope it doesn't pass and get signed into law because of the way it really does eviscerate some of the things we've come to love about copyright law, and some of the things we learned in like the Sony case back in 1984 with the non-infringement and things like that. This bill kind of does an end run around those things, and it's kind of wacky to be combining copyright law and copyright principles and interests here with domain names and the potentially harmful things that could happen to the internet architecture if the Department of Justice were allowed to block certain traffic and disable certain traffic like this. I think there would be a lot of unintended bad consequences that come about from this. But going back to that point about how this eviscerates the doctrine from Sony, where there were a lot of things in that case, but the court held that it would not be an infringement if a device is capable of a substantial non-infringing use. And this adds a monkey wrench to that whole analysis here, because when we look at the definition of what a site is that could come under the hammer of the Department of Justice here, it's a site that's primarily designed and among other things, has no demonstrable commercially significant purpose other than to enable copyright infringement. I'm paraphrasing it there, but that definition is different than a site that is capable of a substantial non-infringing use. There is a difference between those things. This one, even if a site has no commercially significant purpose or use other than copyright infringement, that may not fall outside of the protections of what we see in Sony here. So that makes
YouTube back at its inception maybe had no commercially significant purpose beyond copyright infringement, but it had a lot of other stuff and was being used in lots of other ways.
And I think you made the point, if the that cat playing the piano would have just been playing in obscurity had this been around back then. Wasn't it you in your article where you said something about that on YouTube? So yeah, that's a real danger here. And we sometimes on the show may come across as alarmists and saying, oh, well, this will be harmful to the further development of infrastructure and will disincent investment in infrastructure. But this truly is one of those things I think we should be alarmed about for these reasons. It just gives way too much power to the Department of Justice to essentially deny service to those who are just accused of infringement with very little concern over due process and causing things to happen as remedies which could turn out to really be irretrievable. So I don't like it at all.
Yeah, I don't care for it much either, but I'd like to hear from Ashley on the author's side and rights holders' side. If you found out that there was a website out there that was trafficking in unauthorized redistribution of ebooks, making it easy for folks to download them without compensating anybody, and you heard that the Department of Justice was able to just sort of flip a switch with the registry and turn that site off, would you think that was a good thing?
Generally, I don't think the government should ever be able to flip one switch and do anything, except perhaps declare nuclear war, because I really do have faith in the Pentagon and the National Security Agency to not do that lightly. And neither they nor the Russians ever did that during the height of the Cold War. So when big stuff that explodes is at hand, the government does a really good job. They also do a pretty good job at keeping airliners from flying into each other. We haven't had any major incidents there. But I think the strength of the lobbyists in Washington and the relentless self-interest of large corporations is not something that should have a backdoor quickie access to government process. Now, I don't like infringing websites. We always send takedown notices when somebody tries to put up one of our clients' works as a free download. But in looking at the issue of piracy, there's a difference between, let's say, offshore counterfeit goods that are made to look like Ralph Lauren handbags or whatever and sold in the market and disrupt the cash flow for the financial profit of the pirates. Yeah, we definitely ought to shut that down. It's clear that it hurts everybody and it enriches the counterfeiters.
I just want to applaud the intelligence of your response, Ashley. That was refreshing to hear.
The issue of ebooks and pirated ebooks and free copies of non-compensating ebooks is an interesting challenge, because while I'm against it, and I would definitely tell everybody, if you do that to our clients' books, we're going to somehow come after you. But in terms of what's best for the author, I have to somewhat agree with Cory Doctorow, who says, I think it's Cory, that the biggest problem a new author has is not loss of income for his new work or her new work. It's unawareness of the existence of his new work. And I'm not sure that a certain level of unpaid for ebooks threaten the fabric of the author as much as the poor publisher who 20 years ago printed 3 paperbacks for every 2 that they sold, and they regarded the others as free billboards for the ones that did sell. They're now seeing returns greater than 70% on mini books. And if the retailers are charging $25,000 a piece to put the books in the bookstore for a month, knowing that they're not going to sell because the bookstore is not going to do anything to sell them, how is that any different than piracy of somebody getting, 1,000 free downloads of an ebook? Because if the book is good and the author has a following, anybody who reads a free ebook is very likely to buy the next ebook or buy a real copy of it to make sure that they get the real one. I think there's a way to handle this in a way that will ensure the long-term success of the authors. I mean, libraries have been in the business of selling uncompensated books, or not selling, but giving them away for years, and authors and readers love libraries because they can sample without a big investment. And with ebooks, where as an individual author or as Random House, you can give away the first chapter of the ebook, and anybody who likes it will then read the rest of the book. And I'd be delighted if the focus on selling new books went from book covers, which are a very high expense to get those covers painted, and they very often don't reflect the content of the book. They just make the book look like a book that was in the bookstore 2 weeks ago that sold well. If we had more concentration on what the author wrote, it would probably be better for everybody. So I'm not condoning piracy by any means, but also I'm very encouraging of people who hand me a book and say, here, you got to read this. It's great. I love it. And Carolyn, my wife and co-agent here, gave her sister, who's retired now, a copy of a book that she thought she would enjoy, and she liked it so much she went right down to the bookstore and bought 2 of the author's works.
Right.
So, handing someone a free book is a great thing.
Hey, Chris Dawson, what do you think about the role of VRM in this? I'm sorry, not VRM, DRM in this scenario. Virgil in IRC asks, why not a non-delete code for when you buy the digital books? So when you steal the book, the code wipes the book. My initial response to that is it could probably be end run somehow, since just about every protection measure inevitably is. But do you think that that's the salvation, or is it more, people need to start thinking about changing their business models and going more toward free and getting the word out?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good, because I had everything muted so no one hear me type. Okay, so now I'm back.
We haven't been hearing you type, so that was working.
Okay, that's good. So in terms of DRM, though, this is 2010. There has to be a better way. And you're right. There aren't many DRM schemes that haven't been circumvented. That being said, people rarely realize, I think, that all they do with ebooks is license them. They're not theirs. They're not theirs to lend, loan, give around, or use semester after semester after semester with multiple kids if you're in a school, for example. So the DRM issue has to be addressed. And if we want to see, I think, greater adoption as we become a little more savvy about this, then DRM has to be thought about, and whether that's EPUB with some kind of people say a kill switch, or just a better licensing scheme. I don't know. I don't even know where to head with that. But yeah, the DRM issue is certainly it's kind of a deal breaker in a lot of educational settings, at least.
In what way? How is it a deal breaker in educational settings?
So in settings where there are shared models, there aren't a lot of good ways. Let's say that we wanted to give every student in our school a Kindle. And even though there's not good textbook content available, the vast majority of novels they need to read and even references they can all go on a Kindle. So that's fine. But what happens when the semester is over and we now need to transfer some of that content? I mean, I don't want to buy 600 licenses for a 600 kid school of the Scarlet Letter. I'd want to buy 30 or 60 so that a couple classes can read it at once. How do you deal with that in even if every kid has a Kindle, for example? How do you deal with that sort of an issue? How do you distribute these books in whatever form they take to students and then switch so that another set of students can use them?
Right. The whole fair use in education concept sort of goes out the wayside, or goes by the wayside, when you can't readily copy and redistribute and print and do all the things that a non-DRM'd hard copy book lets you do. Right. I guess that's, yeah.
That's exactly right. And I think maybe the laws haven't caught up, or the best practices haven't caught up with the technology, as is very often the case. But I don't see a clear solution for that in sight, except for looking at open source, looking at just much different models when you're distributing books to an educational setting.
Evan, any thoughts on the DRM role here?
I've always had a hard time conceptualizing what the risk of piracy is in the first place when it comes to books as opposed to music. Chris brings up a good point. I guess it's a bit more problematic in education, and there might be more of an incentive to pirate copies of works for the sake of economy in providing reading material to a whole school full of students. But I just can't imagine that piracy is a problem that DRM needs to solve as much for books as what DRM needs to solve the problem of piracy for music. And I'm just basing that on having grown up and, I first started liking music in the 80s. So the way to share music with your friends was to make mixtapes. That happened with a certain amount of regularity. I don't recall, however, trading photocopies of any type of printed work with my friends, even though the effort in making them, those kinds of copies, would not have been substantially greater than that, with hitting pause and record on the tape recorder. So to me, the whole problem of DRM, the solution that it's proposing to a problem seems to be of a different nature, because the problem as its foundation is of a different character, a different nature.
Ashley, what's the take among your client base on DRM? Do you have any who approach it like Cory Doctorow does and says, I say I want none of my books to have any kind of DRM. I want none of the distribution to be encumbered by that? Or are they still embracing this as a way to ensure that their revenues come to them, or to try to ensure it?
Well, authors in general, our clients and the other authors that I interact with in the community of authors and agents are really want to remain aloof from the question. There are a few that take positions one way or another. Most of them don't really understand how it works. So I can't really provide you a good answer there. I will say that I have yet to see a DRM schema that serves the author's needs. DRMs serve the needs of large megalithic corporations who want to monetize this stuff that they've licensed from authors, or vendors who want to tie the stuff to their platforms. So the most sturdy DRM I think that we have at the moment in the book industry is that in the Kindle, which ties the work to the Kindle reader, and Amazon wisely makes both physical readers that they sell, and they give away Kindle readers for the iPhone and the Android and all that, so that you can read your stuff on multiple devices as long as it's reading through their reader. So I think it will work itself out eventually. To me, in most cases, it just feels like it's more trouble than it's worth. And the big companies' attempts to institutionalize their DRM systems, like Sony's disastrous experiment where they put a virus on everybody's Windows machine, who even put a Sony CD in their computer to listen to it, that was just a public relations nightmare for them. And it didn't have to happen.
Nope, it sure didn't. Okay, well, I want to get to our resource of the week, which this week is from the American Library Association, and it's Banned Book Week starting tomorrow. So wanted to just highlight that and send you over to the ALA site if you want some more information about it. But they're just encouraging libraries and others to pay attention to the fact that sometimes very meritorious books get on banned lists. And they want to raise awareness about that and make sure that people have the most access to the reading material that they want. Things like Tropic of Cancer, for example, Catcher in the Rye, things that are classics in the world of literature and other areas, sometimes can get banned for not very good reasons. So go check out the American Library Association for more information about that. And Evan, what's our tip of the week?
Was this about the cop car?
This is about the cop car.
Oh, yes. I was hoping to bring this up. I guess it was somewhere in South Carolina. A cop this past weekend took his cruiser to I guess it was a fundraiser. I don't know, but there were strippers who were washing cars, and so he took some pictures of the strippers, posing on the hood of the car, and that's all well and good. Any red-blooded American cop is going to do that, but probably the error of his ways truly was posting those pictures on Facebook. And so the moral of the story is, enjoy strippers at the car wash, but you don't have to share it with the world.
Always a good tip, yes. If you're going to have strippers buffing your car with their body parts, keep them off the squad car. I think he had such a good time, says this Gawker article that you sent me, getting his personal car wash, that he then came back with the squad car, and that's when he put the pics on Facebook.
That's awesome.
Yeah, not the best choice. But in any event,
I feel sorry for the officer, and I feel that he was very poorly treated, because one of the things that LEOs are supposed to do is to outreach to their community and make citizens friendly to the police. And, strippers are not necessarily the highest social order, perhaps in some people's view, but they hear a lot, they see a lot, and I think that officer was building bridges to a community that doesn't have much access to police protective services. So I think he was doing okay.
Right on.
Absolutely.
I'm with you.
He just needs a little bit more Facebook training, I think. So hopefully he can find a good home with another department somewhere. It's kind of tragedy that he got let go.
Are we still talking about ebooks?
Are we talking about ebooks?
Only if they deal with strippers.
Are we still talking about ebooks?
Well, I was about to wrap up the show, but certainly, Ashley, if you have anything else on your mind, let us know.
Since we have so many lawyers, I hope, enjoying this program with us, one thing I feel it's required to report, that while we're spending a lot of time talking about ebook piracy, we haven't really said anything about ebook accounting. And I think everybody should be aware that the major publishers in America are not properly reporting ebook sales for any authors of any editions. For example, no publisher reports on their royalties the number of Kindle sales that an ebook had. And I get a different screwball answer from every publisher that I talk to. Mostly, well, we're trying to find our way here, and this is what we're reporting now. But it simplifies down to Random House's statement that there is only one ebook, and we will only report a single number for ebook sales. This has to change, because as all accountants and attorneys and agents know, if there is no granularity, it is impossible to audit.
So are you negotiating this with publishers?
We are trying to. This is one of the mysterious publisher behaviors that's not really specified in most of the traditional contracts, and we've only noticed it in the last few months of royalty statements. Not all publishers report royalties at the same time. Different publishers report at certain times a year. Other publishers report on the anniversary dates of the publication of the book. Both of those are perfectly viable ways to report. And ebook sales have been vanishingly small for the most part. But what we've seen lately is a decrease in the granularity of royalty reports. And we need to sit down with the publishers and work out an answer that works for everyone, because right now what they're doing doesn't work for authors and agents at all.
Okay, well, thank you so much for highlighting that for us, Ashley. We'll keep an eye on it, and we'll leave it to you and your clients and the rest of the authors of the world to try and push back against that kind of regime, because it sounds like something that needs to be sorted out. And with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap this show. This has been TWiL 79. Joining us today have been Chris Dawson from ZDNet's education blog. He is Mr. Datahs, D-A-T-A-H-S, on Twitter. And you can find him over at ZDNet, zdnet.com/blog/education. Thanks so much, Chris, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's been a pleasure. And we'll look for that Android app you're going to code over the weekend. Folks can check out Chris's blog on Monday, because he's going to document his experience coding his first app. So I look forward to that. Ashley, it's been really, really illuminating to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, I had a great time, and I'd be happy to come back again if you need more ranting about publishing.
Wonderful. When we do, we will certainly call on you. Folks, Grayson Agency has a Twitter account at Grayson Agency. And also you can check out Ashley's blog, graysonagency.com/blog. Great chatting with you, Ashley.
Great to be here.
And Evan, thanks so much for returning. Appreciate all your thoughts.
Well, I appreciate being asked to come back. It's been fun. So have a great weekend. It's a great way to spend the Friday afternoon,
Yes, it really is. And of course, I think your tip of the week was the highlight of the show. And if I'm judging right from the IRC, although I saw lots and lots of positive comments on our literary discussions, of course, the car wash was a big hit too. Thanks so much. Folks can find Evan at internetcases.com. He is at Internet Cases on Twitter. I'm over there on Twitter at dhowell, and I'm trying to blog again. This is a new thing for me for a long time. Have been spending a lot of cycles on taking care of my little guy and not so much on taking care of my blog over at ZDNet, but I've got a blog there too called Logarithms, so you guys can check that out from time to time. I'm going to try and actually post about legal matters there too. So
it's awesome.
Thank you so much. Yes. This has been a really, really fun show, and I really appreciate everyone who has tuned in with us live, everyone who is listening after the fact. If you do want to listen to us live, we record every Friday at 11 o'clock Pacific, 1 p.m. Central, 2 Eastern, 1800 UTC at live.twit.tv. And before the show, we put stuff up on Facebook where we would love to get your feedback. That's at facebook.com/thisweekinlaw. So we'll see you next week for TWiL episode 80. Thanks so much, everyone.
See you later.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.